Okay, Chair, we're now streaming live on YouTube. Would you like to start the meeting?
Thanks very much, Wendy. So good afternoon and welcome to the East Devon District Council's Virtual Strategic Planning Committee on the 30th March 2021. I'm your chair, Councillor Dan Ledger. I'd also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded, so please bear this in mind throughout and be careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout the meeting, and we reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this strategic planning meeting is dependent on an internet connection and a power supply, in the event in a break in the internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we're not able to reconnect, we'll consider this meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all phones are switched off or turned on to silent, and make sure all microphones are muted when you're not speaking to avoid any background level noise. Please do not interrupt during the meeting, keep your points short and try not to repeat points that have already been made. If you wish to make a comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda today. Any member of the public who wishes to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website, eastdevon.gov.uk. We can now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone? When you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you've confirmed you're present, please mute your microphone again. Over to you, Wendy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with you, Councillor Ledger.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Allen. Councillor Arnold.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hookway. Councillor Howe.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Moulding.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt. Councillor Rylance.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Thomas.
Present.
Thank you. I can confirm we're quorate today.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So we'll move on to the agenda item number 1, which is public speaking. Wendy, we don't have any members of the public wishing to speak, do we?
No, we don't.
Thank you very much. So agenda item 2 is minutes of the previous meeting. If anyone's got any comments, can you do so by raising your electronic blue hand? If I see no hands are raised, then I'll take this as an indication that all the minutes are agreed. I'll take that all the minutes are agreed then. Thank you very much. Agenda item 3 is apologies. Wendy, who have we received apologies from, please?
Councillor Bailey, Councillor Chamberlain and Councillor Skinner.
Thank you very much. They're all noted. Agenda item number 4 is declarations of interest. We'll do this via a roll call, and it's over to you again, Wendy.
Thank you. So, Chair, I'll start with you.
None.
Thank you. Councillor Davey.
I'm an Axminster town councillor. I think that's particularly relevant to item 8.
Item 8. And it's just to confirm, it's a personal interest, is it?
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Arnold.
Thanks. I'll declare as Colleton Parish Councillor as well, just in case we're looking at patches of land everywhere. Thank you.
Is that item 8 as well?
Yes, and that's personal, sadly not pecuniary. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey.
None, thanks, Wendy.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward.
None that I'm aware of. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Howe.
None that I'm aware of at this time.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham.
None.
Thank you. Councillor Moulding.
None.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance.
None beyond the usual a personal one of being a Broadcliffe Parish Councillor.
And is that for item 8 as well?
Well, I mean, there weren't any sites identified by name in item 8, but since there's a lot of development happening in Broadcliffe Parish, there's a chance that there could be some kind of interest in most of the items, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Thomas.
None, Wendy, thank you.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So agenda items 5, matters of urgency. I can confirm that there are no matters of urgency to be discussed today. Agenda item number 6 is confidential and exempt items. I can confirm again that there are no confidential or exempt items. So we move into the substantial part of the agenda. Agenda item 7, East Devon Local Plan Committee Work Programme for 2021. And it's over to Mr. Ed Freeman to present a report. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Chairman, and afternoon, members. So this report really seeks to take us through a programme of work for the committee over the coming year. So I'll just quickly start with a sort of summary of where we are in terms of the local plan. So obviously members will be aware that we've been out to consultation on an issues and options report over the last couple of months. That ended on the 15th of March. We've got about 650 responses to that consultation, which we're currently going through and analysing and looking to bring a detailed feedback report to you at the next meeting in April. And obviously that needs to then inform our work moving forward through the year, which is the core subject of this report, is looking at a programme of topic papers which we'll be looking to bring to members over the coming year to highlight the key issues that we need members' advice, comment on, and to help production of the draft local plan with the view to then bringing a draft plan to you at the end of the year. So you'll see as you go through the report on page 14, there's a table that seeks to summarise the reports and key papers we'd be looking to bring to each of the upcoming meetings. So you can see from the table that today the main substantive report in terms of local plan production is the urban capacity study work. And then, as I mentioned, in April, we'll be looking to bring the feedback report on the issues and options consultation, equally feedback on the sustainability appraisal, the scoping of which was also out to consultation, and then also looking at scoping and visioning of the plan. And then from May, we get really into more detailed subject matters around housing and development needs, employment development needs, a spatial strategy, moving right through to starting to review the HELAR sites. And obviously the call for sites was open up until middle of this month as well, so we're sifting through those and taking those through the HELAR methodology that members agreed previously as well. And this programme takes us right the way through to the end of this year, where we hope in December to be able to bring a draft local plan to you, to then scrutinise that and work with that as a basis for then leading to a consultation in the spring of next year. So seeking members' views on that proposed programme and the documents that we're looking to bring through to members. Then the third section of the report looks at some of the evidence documents that have been and continue to be produced to support that work. And you'll see at the end of the report an appendix with a table summarising all of those documents and the work that's ongoing to produce an evidence base to support plan production. Then section 4 looks at the importance of establishing a strategy in the early stages of plan making. So we're keen to have that discussion with you through this committee as we progress through the programme that we've detailed in this report. And obviously section 5 looks to highlight some of the key challenges that we could face in doing that, and the importance of keeping to that work programme if we are to get to the point of a draft plan at December of this year. So really those are the main highlights of the report. The recommendation really is seeking members' views and comments on that work programme over the coming year, and seeking members' agreement to that, and the timescale seeking to get to an early draft local plan for committee consideration in December. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Ed. Well, firstly, we'll open up to non-committee members. Does any non-committee member wish to speak at this time? No? Okay, we'll take it into committee then. Councillor Eleanor Rylance, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry,
first of all,
sorry, Dan. I can't find my
okay.
electronic blue hand. Sorry, I just couldn't find it.
No problem at all. Eleanor, just hang on 2 seconds. Marianne, over to you.
Well, I'm looking at page 22 in Appendix 1, which says sites will be assessed by an external panel. Who's going to be on this, and who is going to decide who's going to be on this? I'm also appalled at the lack of climate change evidence in this document. I'd also, with regard to page 24, it was talking about housing. So when is the government going to stipulate that housing must be energy efficient? There is absolutely no sense in retrofitting. This just costs a lot more money than building it properly in the first place. Page 25, there's the employment site analysis. Are we going to be looking at potential impact of home working, which could possibly mean a reduction in demand for employment sites? Page 25 is talking about town centres, and I just wonder whether this is an opportunity to revive town centres by having more office space in converted buildings which have now been left, for example, bank properties, that sort of thing, which have all been abandoned by the big banks. This would seem to present a perfect opportunity to have, I think they possibly may have accommodation as part of these buildings, and then the rest of it could be converted to more commercial use, including offices, which would help to stimulate the local high streets. Page 28, it talks about digital infrastructure, and this, of course, is absolutely essential as parts of our district have very poor connectivity. And then it comes down to modern methods of construction. Well, this exactly comes down to the potential for them to build more energy efficient homes as part of this. I think those are my main points. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I had to interrupt.
No problem at all. Thanks very much. Ed, do you think you could cover off some of those questions and then we will take it into the committee, please?
Yes, certainly, Chairman. The panel, I think Councillor Wixon referred to as the HELAR panel, which is was part of the methodology on the HELAR that members agreed, I think, before Christmas, if memory serves. So that panel is an advisory panel. It's not making any decisions about allocations. It's simply to advise members on a technical basis in terms of the potential issues in terms of developing sites, their viability and deliverability. And that is a panel made up primarily of professional advisors, but also some developers and supporting expertise, as well as members in terms of the developability and issues with developing sites. But obviously that information then comes to members to actually make decisions about what's put forward as potential allocations for consultation. In terms of build standards of new homes, I think the whole planning profession and the building industry is waiting on tenterhooks for the government to announce what it's going to do in terms of that. They consulted, I think it was in 2019, on the future home standard. Still not entirely clear about where that's going and what the government are looking to introduce. Obviously, they've been waylaid by recent events, but hopefully we will get some clarity from that over the coming year that can then feed into our work. So obviously we need to make some assumptions as we develop our own work in terms of what we will be able to do. Members may recall the Future Home Standard actually put a lot of this in terms of the standards of construction of new homes, in terms of levels of insulation and renewable energies, etc., into the building control regime rather than the planning regime. So it is quite important that we understand that in terms of what we're looking at in terms of policies for the local plan and what we can rely on being dealt with through revised building regulation standards. In terms of employment land, yes, certainly we need to look at the impact of home working. I think it's quite difficult at the moment to evaluate what impact that might have, because obviously we're still in a lockdown situation where a lot of people are working from home. Whether or not that same proportion of people working from home will continue in the long term, it's difficult to say. I think we assume there will be a lot more home working than there has been prior to the pandemic. But it's difficult to quantify that. So that's something that's still emerging in terms of looking at that and the impacts of that, which certainly includes town centres and how we might be able to reuse some of the vacant buildings there, either for dwellings or, as has been said, for office accommodation. I think both of those areas are things we asked questions on in the issues and options consultation. So it'd be interesting to feedback at your next meeting at the views of our communities in terms of the extent that they think home working will impact and how we can make use of vacant spaces in town centres to deliver what communities feel they need from their town centres now in this new normal that we will shortly find ourselves in. I think that's all of the issues. If I've missed anything, happy to come back. Thank you, Chairman.
You missed out digital connectivity and also transport. I suppose I should have mentioned, although it does refer to Devon County Council.
Apologies, Councillor Rickson. I wasn't sure what the question was in terms of digital infrastructure. Clearly, it's something we need to prioritise and deliver through the plan. A lot of its delivery is obviously outside of the planning regime, however, but certainly something we need to have policies to support its delivery as another key aspect of home working, but also increasingly in terms of people's connectivity with society as a whole, with lots of things having moved online as a result of recent events.
Thanks very much, Ed. So we'll move on to Councillor Eleanor Rylance.
Thank you, Chair. So like Councillor Rickson, I did want to mention climate change because I feel very, very strongly, as probably she does and most of the rest of us do as well, that climate change has to be placed centrally within our planning system, and it's got to be one of the overarching guidelines, really. And so with that in mind, I've got what I'd really like to see as one of the strategies for our local plan is essentially that we start planning to keep it local and to keep it cosy. So we build houses that are by design well insulated, by design cheap to heat, by design dry and warm, which is essentially what you want from your house, your shelter, and also keeping it local in terms of enabling people to shop locally and work locally. You know, yes, going forwards, we may be looking at people working from home a whole lot more. We need to incorporate that into our design planning, because the thing that will send people back into their offices is not having a suitable space at home from which to work. Even if they could technically do their job from home, they won't do it if they don't have the space to do it. And I speak from bitter experience right now, even though I should have the space to do it. It's hard. It's really hard. So we need, I think, as an overarching strategy, trying to keep people as close to their communities as possible, you know, if they can, but also making sure that they don't need to expend vast amounts of energy on heating their homes should be our overarching strategy for this local plan, to my mind. And I don't know what other people think about this, but this is something we absolutely can get right, and we should get it right at this stage. Because if we don't plan for houses that are very energy efficient and probably above current standards, then we are delivering houses that are not as good as we could be getting them. And bearing in mind that a house is a big ticket item in somebody's life, and it's designed hopefully to last for many decades, we can't afford to be releasing houses into the environment that are going to be leaking energy everywhere. We need to be producing good houses that don't leak energy, don't cost the earth to keep warm, are dry by design, and allow people to live the life that they want to live in them. So yeah, and the last thing I wanted to say was thank you very much, Mr. Freeman, for probably all the reports that you've written this afternoon. So blanket thanks for all the reports, because interestingly, I found myself agreeing with a lot of the responses that are in most of the reports. But yeah, so that's what I wanted to say. Keep it local, keep it cozy, and that's what I'll do. That, to my mind, that's what our planning strategy should be. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Rylance. We'll move on to Councillor Arnold next.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if it might be useful if Ed or you, but probably Ed, could just update us on where we are with the joint strategy with the other districts, because I think that affects a few factors in this document, in the appendix, particularly the duty to cooperate bit there, because I think it was felt by the other districts and agreed by us that in fact a large or all of that joint strategic work would be done externally. That's right, Ed, isn't it, effectively? I just wonder if you could take us through that and how that affects any aspects of this report. Thank you.
Certainly, through you, Chairman. I mean, the situation currently is that the councils have all formally agreed to do a non-statutory strategic plan for the Greater Exeter area. So that won't include policies or site allocations, but will give a clear direction in terms of the aspirations of the councils for the growth and development of the Greater Exeter area. What we've been working on since that resolution was made at the end of last year is a timetable for production of the plan and looking at the resourcing and how that can be brought forward. As Councillor Arnold said, I think the likelihood is that that will be in the form of an external appointment of consultants to undertake a lot of that work because of concerns about the resourcing that's available, given that obviously our priority is developing the local plan. And so we'll be hopefully bringing a report to members, I think in June now, following the local elections, seeking members' views on that approach and the timetable that sits alongside that. So we need to factor that into the timetable before you, in terms of that would be an additional report probably to the June meeting to discuss that further. Thank you.
Just on the duty to cooperate, Ed, do you want to cover anything off with Dorset as well?
Yes, so obviously the duty to cooperate is wider than just our partner authorities within Greater Exeter. It's also looking further afield to Dorset and South Somerset, but also to organisations like Natural England and the Environment Agency as well. So in particular, in terms of Dorset, they were consulting recently on the draft Dorset plan. And through the portfolio holder, we've sent back comments on that in terms of our views in terms of their proposals there, just obviously highlighting that we're keen to work with them in terms of duty to cooperate issues, and obviously that they shouldn't make any assumptions about delivering any of their housing need in East Devon, for example. So we led the foundations, shall we say, through those comments of our views in terms of where their plan is heading, and obviously we'll continue to work with them and other partners as plans progress. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Arnold, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just two very quick points. First of all, just following on from Councillor Rickson, or both points actually. We don't yet have, unfortunately, this climate action officer in place. You know, a long time after it was agreed, you know, for reasons that I think we understand. But I just wanted to check with Ed, once that person's in place, will they have a role in this from very near the beginning? Because I think the idea of the role was to make sure that there was a, you know, climate action critical friend, so to speak, within the building, who was always, you know, which of course you do yourself and I understand, but was always challenging on that basis. So that's the first question. Would they, within this work plan, have a recognised role? And the second thing was just because I slightly missed Councillor Rickson's question on this, but it was about a particular, she was concerned about a particular panel sitting outside of the council that would advise on something, but I missed what that was. I just wonder if Ed could come back on that one as well, please, Chair. Thank you. Oh, and finally, just to agree with Eleanor, Councillor Ryan's brilliant work here, so thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Arnold. We'll go to Councillor Blakey first, and then we'll get a bundle of questions answered by Ed. Otherwise, we'll just be going back and forth all day. So, Councillor Blakey, you're up next.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And a question to Ed through you, if I may. If you go to page 17 of the proposed schedule, it relates to November of this year. It mentions that the Cranbrook plan, the DPD, is in production. And that is before the government inspector at the moment. The question I have, and I hope it's academic, is that if the current DPD is found unsound by the government inspector, how will that impact upon the timescale that is proposed in the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blakey. So, Ed, back to you just to answer those two questions if you can.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, coming back to Councillor Arnold's point, yes, keen to work with any climate change officer on developing proposals through the local plan to address climate change. I think it would be helpful to have that wider support, but clearly I think climate change is a key part of the three strands of sustainable development, really, particularly the environment component. So it's a key part of what we're seeking to do through the planning system at the moment. Just to pick up, I think there is only one document actually specifically listed in the evidence list for climate change, but that's really because I think climate change runs through as a thread through so many of the other documents that we're proposing to produce in terms of evidence, that there weren't many that just stood on their own as climate change. So hopefully that's clear in what's before you. I think the other thing Councillor Arnold was asking was about the panel that Marion Rickson was asking about. It's the HELAR panel. So members will recall doing housing and employment land availability assessment at the moment. So we've been had the call for sites. Those now need to be assessed by the panel, which was part of the HELAR methodology that members signed off last year. In terms of Councillor Blakey's point, in terms of the Cranbrook plan, I very much hope it will be found sound, and so this will be an academic problem. But I think part of our thinking by putting that key paper in terms of Cranbrook to November is the hope that we will have clarity over the DPD by then. And obviously we can pick up the outcomes of that. I think there's a question obviously in terms of the Cranbrook plan, assuming it is found sound, as to whether or not we continue with the Cranbrook plan as a standalone plan or seek to integrate it into a new local plan. Similarly, if it's found unsound, heaven forbid, then there will be a question as to, you know, can we address those concerns and then incorporate it through into the local plan and take it through that route. So there are various scenarios if that did happen, but I'm still confident that the Cranbrook plan will be found sound ultimately, and I hope by the time we're bringing that November report to you, it's good news. But all is not lost, as it were, because there's still that, if the worst were to happen, because there's still the opportunity to obviously integrate a lot of that work into the new local plan if the need arises. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. So there's no more speakers. So I'd look towards the recommendations that are on the report. The Strategic Planning Committee endorsed the proposed programme for committee consideration of the local plan reports throughout 2021 and into 2022. That on the basis of the proposed programme, Strategic Planning Committee agreed to work towards an early draft local plan for committee consideration in December 2021. Does anyone have any comments on that? Eleanor?
Yes, through your chair, I just wanted to ask Ed, so some of these meetings look like monster meetings, and I'm just wondering whether it's maybe slightly over ambitious. I mean, I think it's brilliant. If we're hoping to get it all through in 1 year, that's fantastic. But do you think it's realistic ambitious, or do you think it's slightly over ambitious? Are we likely to slip on the timetable, or do we have to put aside a whole day for each of these meetings? So that's my question.
Over to you, Ed.
It's certainly on the ambitious end of realistic, I would say. I think it requires discipline both on officers and members' parts to get through that programme and ensure that we get the outcomes we need from each of those meetings to inform our work, and then as officers that we can bring those reports through in that timescale. I'm confident it is doable. I think some of those meetings will be long meetings. We may well need a whole day for some of those issues. It may be that when we come to putting together the draft agenda that I need to have a discussion with the chairman about, is it doable in a day even, or do we need to split into additional meetings to get through that work programme? But I know members were keen at the outset that we move forward as quickly as possible in terms of the draft plan, and so that's what we've tried to do in working up this timetable and work programme, is do something that we think is ambitious but is doable with the resources we have and the resources that are coming with the 2 additional posts that we've created in the team that we're currently recruiting to. So I hope that we can keep to that work programme, but obviously, it's worth flagging up. Obviously, if for some reason, items are deferred or members need additional time, or indeed, if something happens in terms of our resources and we don't have the resources we currently have to move forward as quickly as officers, then there is a danger that timetable slips. We'll obviously try and avoid that, as I'm sure members will, but obviously we need to monitor that as we go through the year, and obviously I'll make members aware as we go if I'm concerned that we are slipping. Because I see that as part of my role as project managing this process as well. So that's another aspect that I'll try and keep an eye on and keep members informed on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. Councillor Howe, you want to comment?
Yeah, I suppose it's just a word of warning to everybody, because obviously this has to go, I assume, back to full council when we finish with it. And I'm just wondering whether there's an earlier opportunity to get some of the work signed off by full council. Otherwise, I can see it, as it has done in the past, go to full council and then being rejected. And I don't think any of us would want that. So I'm just trying to work out how we can segment it a bit and just make sure full council is still with us. Well, 6 yearly, I suppose, 6 monthly, I suppose, half year, the halfway point, if we can break something out of it. You know what I mean? I'm just being very careful about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and bearing in mind the full council still needs to endorse this, is my understanding. So it's just looking for that balance somewhere of mitigating that risk. Sorry.
No, it's a great point, and thanks very much for making it. Ed, do you have anything that you wish to add on that?
I think Councillor Howe's right. It is a risk, and I suppose the timetable we put together does assume full council sign off before the draft plan goes out to consultation is straightforward and can be dealt with in a single meeting. I'm not sure. I mean, obviously we could take interim reports through to council if that's members' wish. I suppose my fear with that is the additional work that creates, which could in itself delay progress across the year, given the number of reports we've already given ourselves to produce and the workload that's involved with that. So I think there are risks involved with that as well. I would also hope that through these strategic planning committee meetings over the year that we can, as we get into particular subject matters that are no doubt controversial, that the wider membership of the council will join us at these meetings and engage in the discussion, so that their issues and any concerns have been highlighted through this forum, so that there are no surprises when we do get to a full council meeting. And I think that's probably the better approach to my mind than creating additional work for ourselves with further reports and that may in themselves lead to the timetable slipping. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to Councillor Arnold, and then I need to press the committee for an actual recommendation to come forward or some form of proposal, because yeah, we've got a lot of agendas to get through today. Councillor Arnold.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. I could really see exactly the wisdom in what Councillor House said. I think it is sort of outpointed, so to speak, by what Ed said towards the end of his. I think you could have a law of unintended consequences if we tried to take this piecemeal through council. You can imagine, can't you, how that might work if on a particularly contentious issue, perhaps. And I would worry about officer time and resource on that very much. And I would endorse what Ed has said. You know, obviously it's a lovely sunny day and we haven't got a huge turnout today, but we have had in the past. And so, you know, this is here really to try and hear everything that members want to hear and us as a politically balanced gathering to debate the hell out of that, I think. But that is with absolute respect to what Mike has said and to his experience. But I think it could really derail this if we're not careful. Chair, if it's of any help, and I've always felt that just because I've got the microphone and it's timely, and I wouldn't normally do this because I'm also leader, but I would happily propose those two recommendations as they currently stand, if that's of any help to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Arnold. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Rylance, thank you very much. With no other members wishing to speak, we will go through to Mrs. Shaw to sum up.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, there's two limbs to this motion. Firstly, that the committee endorse the proposed programme for committee consideration of local plan reports through 2021 and into 2022. And secondly, that on the basis of the proposed programme, the committee agree to work towards an early draft local plan for committee consideration in December 2021. Members, please press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is underway. Okay, Chair, so I can advise the vote is carried with 9 votes in support, no votes against and no abstentions.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and thank you very much, Mrs. Shaw. We'll move on to agenda item 8, the urban capacity study, and again it's over to Ed Freeman to present a report.
Thank you, Chairman. So yes, this is the first sort of substantive evidence document for the new local plan. And this is work that was started as part of the guest work where we were undertaking urban capacity studies for the main towns across the Greater Exeter area in partnership with Exeter, Mid Devon and Teignbridge using a joint methodology, which you'll see is appended to the report for members' information. Essentially, an urban capacity study is an opportunity to look at and assess sites within the existing urban areas that might be able to accommodate 5 homes or more, to understand what capacity we have to meet our housing needs from within the existing built-up areas, which is obviously from a planning perspective and looking at government guidance, the ideal scenario would be, obviously it's brownfield first and sites within existing built-up areas. So the ideal would be if we could meet all of our needs on existing brownfield sites within the built-up areas. Sadly, that's not going to be anywhere near possible from our assessment, as you will see. So we've looked at each of the key towns, including Cranbrook, despite its obviously very recent construction, using the methodology that's appended to the report. And you'll see in the other appendix an assessment and breakdown of each of the towns and the sites that were looked at. It's important to remember that each of the sites looked at is looked at from the point of view of what's physically and practically possible. Obviously, we haven't looked at the willingness of landowners necessarily, or some of the more detailed assessments and looking at layouts of sites specifically as we would if a planning application were in for any of those sites. So it's a fairly high level assessment, but a useful guide to what capacity we have. Fundamentally, what it's telling us, you can see in the table that bridges across from the bottom of page 31 to page 32, that across the towns, there's a potential supply of 766 homes. And as I say, that's very much a maximum because some of those sites may never come forward because there's not a willing landowner, or there may be very specific constraints to those sites that might make delivering those more difficult than our initial assessment suggests. So members will appreciate 766 homes is significantly less than 1 year's housing supply coming from land within the built-up area boundaries. So obviously, while it can form a component of our housing supply moving forward, it's not likely to be a significant element of that. And so this raises for us the question of sort of what do we do in terms of those sites? Do members want to take a very proactive approach to their delivery and look at putting a lot of resource into trying to bring those sites forward? However, my concern is that could be very resource intensive in terms of potentially having to contact landowners. Well, first of all, establish who landowners are in many cases, contact them, have conversations with them about those sites and how they might come forward, if they could come forward. And also some of the presumptions that go into those sorts of conversations, in that obviously we don't want to lead people on into thinking that they might be acceptable to come forward when there may be issues with them. So that's potentially fraught with difficulties and could be very resource intensive. The alternative approach, which I think would be my preferred approach, is to obviously note that those sites exist. Chances are a number of them will come forward in the form of windfall sites, as has historically been the case. And we usually help to factor in windfall sites as part of a kind of cushion within our housing supply figures, to sort of say, well, you know, we've got this cushion within those figures of these sites, and over the years we can show a record of a proportion of windfall sites coming forward that help to bolster our housing land supply and make sure that's robust. So those are the options there, and I think very much a preferred approach would not be to put too much resource into trying to unlock those specific sites and rely very much on the market delivering those as and when it can. So the recommendations before members are to note the urban capacity study and the summary of findings detailed in the report, and also ask members to note the limited capacity available to accommodate development within the existing built-up area boundaries, and the resulting need for us to find obviously substantial land outside of those areas to meet the future development needs of the district. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Ed, and thank you for the report. Does any non-member wish to speak at this time? Councillor Peter Faithful, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. There has been a report about how much surplus house building there's been all around the district, Teignmouth, Exeter, or East Devon, Mid Devon. So we seem to be having way above our basic 900 and whatever houses built in our district per year. So I think Ed did sort of mention a little bit about that we can show that we can, even if we start out with a lower figure, we can expect to build to reach the minimum within 1 year. Would that be a fair assessment, that we shouldn't be necessarily insisting on having our 900 put down? If that makes sense.
I think we would want to, just to protect our position, have some form of buffer in there, but I'm happy to be corrected by Ed on this.
Yeah, so we would usually build in a cushion of some description into housing numbers in a plan, because obviously if all we put in the plan is allocations up to the number that we have to provide to meet the government requirements, and then one or two of those sites don't come forward for some reason, or don't come forward in good time, then we could easily find ourselves in a position of not being able to maintain an adequate supply, not having a 5-year housing land supply, not meeting the government's delivery test, and obviously being left with the consequences of that, which are that housing delivery policies in the local plan do not carry full weight, and the need to deliver potentially action plans to deliver that position in terms of the consequences of the housing delivery test. So that's not a position we want to be in, I'm sure, and we need to protect our position to make sure that that doesn't happen. Housing supply by its nature ebbs and flows over time. So yes, we've had a good couple of years. If you look in the last housing monitoring report, the last couple of years have been very good, and at times we've delivered more than we're required to, but in some of the previous years before that we delivered less. So I don't think it's fair to say that because we've delivered more than the 928, I think it is, at the moment, that we necessarily can take our foot off the gas, as it were. It's because next year particularly given the pandemic that we've had. You know, the monitoring period that runs to the end of this month may not look so rosy. I don't know at this point. So we have to take the good with the bad and look at how it averages out over a good period of time to make an assessment as to how we're doing, which is what the housing monitoring report does. So I don't subscribe to the view that we're over providing over the last couple of years. I think it's just we've had a good couple of years that helps to compensate for not so good years before that and potentially to come. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Ed, and thanks for the explanation. My hands have gone a bit over the place, so apologies if I'm calling you in the wrong order here. But Councillor Blakey, you're up first.
Right, thank you, Chair. I think this is queue jumping, but you know, a couple of points. First, I know what Ed had to say about the difficulty of getting hold of some of the landowners in many of these cases, but I do think we should try. I think a decent effort should be made to contact those landowners and invite them to bring their properties forward for consideration. Take the point that they may not all be suitable for other reasons, but I think we should try to extract where we can the best from available sites within the towns. I think the other thing that hasn't been taken into account, and probably because at this stage it's not possible to do so, but will be in the foreseeable, is the amount of additional former commercial property that might become available as a result of the reset of how towns are going to operate post-COVID, as businesses are changing their method of operation. We're seeing in large cities, certainly, office blocks, entire office blocks, now becoming unoccupied or very, very lightly occupied. I think that there will be many opportunities in our larger towns to redevelop commercial property for residential use, and obviously there are no numbers here that take account of that yet, but that has to be a consideration, I would suggest. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blakey. Councillor Eleanor Rylance.
Thank you, Chair. So I have a slightly technical question, and my question is this: I note that the plots of land that were identified for a notional 5 dwellings. What type of dwelling is this notional dwelling? Because since we're talking about an urban environment, I mean, it may be appropriate to build flats, to go up 3 or 4 floors and build flats, and maybe actually get more dwellings onto the plots that we're talking about. So this might be the smallest possible number of houses we could be talking about, or it might. There's no way of assessing what type of dwelling is your notional dwelling. So I'm just wondering whether you know what sort of criteria they used for that, or whether they would. They'd have a sort of slider for if you put flats on this spot, you know, you can go up 3 or 4 floors. How many dwellings then would it be? Because you know it's not quite a year's supply, but say we went up 3 or 4 floors with flats, it could be 2 years' supply instead. I mean, there's no way of telling. So do you know what sort of dwelling they were talking about?
Thank you, Councillor Rylance. We'll just take one more speaker and then we'll go back to words. So Councillor Ollie Davey, you're up next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think this is very useful data and quite a salutary reminder that you can't necessarily rely on everything going inside the built-up area boundaries. And I think there's a public perception that there's infill happening all over the place. There are, as we've referred, these windfall sites, and there's a lot of this kind of subdivision of people looking at their land and thinking, well, we've got an enormous garden here, we could stick another house in it. And I think there's a public perception that these are happening all over the place. Ed actually kind of partially answered my question because he mentioned that we have historical data on that, and I just wondered if he was able to put any kind of quantity on that, on what sort of quantity of infill sites we might reasonably expect to see. And I take Councillor Blakey's point as well that we may well see commercial properties being transformed into homes, but with that's guesswork, isn't it? And we can't operate on that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Freeman, we'll go over to you now. Can you just answer the few questions that have been asked?
I'll try. Thank you, Chairman. I'm just looking at the.
Do you want me to come back, take another speaker, and then come back?
Yes, it might be. I'm just checking the methodology. Yes, you can come back to me in a moment. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Howe, you're up next.
Well, I won't cheer up Ed either, though. I suppose we need joined up thinking. We now know that the government's Levelling Up Fund is open to us. We are getting a seed money to try and put together a plan for Exmouth. And in my own head, I've always looked at the shopping centre in Exmouth, Magnolia Centre, and thought, God, this needs a bulldozer and redevelopment. Now, if you did that properly and you did it well, you'd have lovely office accommodation, stroke shopping accommodation on the ground floor, and a bit like Princess Hay in Exeter, 3, 4, 5 flights of apartments, stroke flats above. So you would get people into the centre, living in the centre, not needing to go out and leave Exmouth, but you've got a train station and everything else in Exmouth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we need to be ambitious on this, and I don't think the full impact of the Levelling Up Fund has been probably, I can't say, because there's never a definitive yes, but added to our equation, and we need to use it. Blatantly, we need to use it. We'll have our MP's support, we know that as well. So we need to really look at Exmouth and get a move on getting that scheme together and use that. 500 homes in Exmouth on that Magnolia site would be lovely. And wouldn't it just do, the goods for the town centre, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we can achieve a lot more than the numbers Mr. Freeman has, respectfully. I know the work he's done, produced, but I think we need to look with a bit wider scheme and look a bit more cleverly on the money available to us to use the right way. So I hope we can reinvigorate this with a few more numbers, shall we say.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. I think, you are right. We are in the lowest priority in that, though, and I think that needs to just be mindful. And we do have another MP, so we do need to be bringing forward projects with Neil Parish in the likes of Axminster, Honiton, Seaton. Even speak to Mel Stride. I know it's only a small part of our district, but we still need to bring forward some ideas. Ed, over to you. Hopefully I've followed you enough time.
Thank you, Chairman. I can't, to be honest, I can't find the exact reference in the methodology, but my understanding is, in terms of how we've assessed the capacity of sites, it's basically been an officer assessment as to what we think reasonably a site can accommodate, having a look at the density of the surrounding areas, story heights in the surrounding area, and taking into account requirements such as access roads, parking, garden spaces and things like that. So what we won't have done is, for example, if we found a site within a street that's predominantly 2-story houses, we won't have taken a view that you could build a 30-story tower block in that space. We'll have taken the view that you're going to build 2-story houses in that space, and the numbers are a result of that. So it's not rocket science in that sense, but it's based on an officer judgment rather than a very prescriptive methodology, I think. But I think they're reasonable assumptions to make based on what's likely to be acceptable to us in planning terms. In terms of Councillor Davies' points, we have got records of the numbers of windfall sites coming forward over time, and I think we report on that in the housing monitoring report. I don't have that information to hand, so I wouldn't want to quote numbers and then be totally out. I mean, it's a relatively small proportion of the overall, but they do trickle through quite nicely and do help to top the numbers up and obviously keep that robust. And I think, amazingly, that does continue to happen quite consistently over the years. So I think we can rely on that in our numbers for the next plan period as well, and assume, based on historic trends, that those numbers will continue in the future. I think when we get into reports later in the year on housing numbers and housing site allocations and things, perhaps make sure we bring some information to members on the historic trends on windfall sites coming forward and how that's factored into our thinking of numbers in the future. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed Freeman. Councillor Ingham, you did have your hand up for a while. I don't know if it's my screen or if you've taken it down.
No, taking it down, Chair.
No problem at all. Thank you very much. So, Councillor Rylance, back to you.
Sorry, Chair. Historic hand. I haven't taken it down yet.
I'm on to a winner today. Councillor Arnold, back to you.
Very quickly, Chair. Just to remind everybody, we are in PERDA. I was just noticing Councillor Howe's mentioning of this generous levelling up fund into which we are designated in Division 3, I think. But I just thought it might be out of a point of information that might be interesting there, that there is going to be a meeting between a few senior members and the MPs, Neil Parish and Simon Jupp, on Wednesday the 14th of April to talk about how we work together to get into the Levelling Up Fund. But as you quite rightly pointed out, Chair, it doesn't just cover Simon's constituency, it's Neil's as well. That said, I thought that Councillor Howe's idea about the Magnolia Centre was fantastic. And anything we can do where there are those kind of opportunities, what's left to us within built-up area boundaries to maximise the use of the footprint is a really smart idea. And if we can in some way work across departments and committees on that would be really promising. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Arnold. Councillor Moulding, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I appreciate, obviously, this is an urban, what do we call it, urban capacity study. So we're just looking at the towns, but of course it's skewed because it doesn't consider the potential in Cranbrook because there's no defined town boundary there yet. And of course, it doesn't include areas like Pinhoe and Broadclist, where we know there is quite considerable potential for development and already sites in the offing. So I find it difficult to assimilate the figure of 700 and so many houses per year when this is merely for the towns and at the moment doesn't include Cranbrook. So it just gives, admittedly, it tells us what is happening in our towns at the moment, and there is scope for potential opportunities, but it doesn't actually give us the complete picture.
Thank you very much, Councillor Moulding. Does anyone else have anything they wish to say, or are we happy with the recommendations put before us? Can I have some form of proposal from the committee, please? Don't all jump at once. I'm happy to. Oh, Councillor Rylance. Over to you, Councillor Rylance.
Sorry, I'm happy to propose that we accept this report with the caveat that we maybe seek some maybe slightly higher density than already existing within urban areas, because I think going forwards, if we don't have any available land within towns, then the only solution is going to be to go upwards, as they have done in Exeter because they've had to. But there's nothing wrong with flat living, and I think Great Britain has to get used to living in flats, really. People outside London, that is. There's a lot going for flat living. There's a lot going for city centre living. And crucially, it stops city centres from dying out because there are people around who use the businesses. So, I think we need to keep an open mind on that. So I would like to see something within any recommendation that includes, bringing people back to live in city centres and town centres. because without it, a lot of our shops are not going to recover. And crucially, you know, the old 19th century way of building things wasn't really dense enough for modern living, particularly with the climate emergency in the offing. So I don't know. So I'd like to suggest that we accept this report, but with the caveat that we explore higher density options as well within towns. Is that, would anybody be okay about supporting that as a recommendation?
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. So that's a proposal there. Does anyone wish to second that proposal?
Yeah, I'll second it, Chair. I mean, I think it doesn't rule out exploring higher density anyway. I've looked at the methodology of the capacity study just now, and it does have an item on density, but it doesn't. It's not particularly clear what it means. But I think. Yeah, but we certainly ought to explore higher density, but we also need to accept that we will get what developers want to build unless we're going to do it ourselves. So I'm happy to endorse that amendment, but also with caveats.
Thank you very much, Councillor Davey. Councillor Thomas, I know you're going to have an opinion on flats going up for the length and breadth of upline. So do you want to come in at that point? You're on mute.
No, I was thinking, Chair, actually Seaton was an ideal place for extensive development. I think we'll get that wedge out of the way between Colleton and Seaton and the world will be a lot better. But joking apart, on density-wise, there's no question that looking at the lead set by Exeter City Council in the way they're developing the centre there, recognising the higher density and actually not being fixed on the idea that something is 2 stories now, so it's only 2 stories in the future. Their view is very much a case of looking to higher density development, as you'll know from the plans that we've seen from them. Comment also on Councillor Moulding's comments. The danger of a report like this is you look at 766 and it takes on some magical value, which frankly it lacks. For the number of key reasons. One, it seems to exclude some already envisaged expansion sites to some of the towns. But primarily things like you've got Cranbrook nil. You know, the idea of trying to get any figures when your biggest development area in the town is seen as as an urban area is seen as nil, does tend to put rather greater value than's warranted. Beyond that, I mean, I'm quite happy with the proposal as it stands, but I think we just need to recognise the limitations of the figures and what they represent.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thomas. Councillor Blakey, we'll go to you and then we'll hopefully take this to a vote.
Yeah, it's just, thank you, Jay, just relating to the wording of recommendation number 2. I'm just a bit concerned about the wording that need to find substantial land outside of these areas to meet future development needs of the district. I think that's sort of pushing the future development away from the existing towns, and I would like to see some wording that would ensure that every effort is made to use such land as is available in the towns and to seek out other opportunities. So I think the wording I would prefer to see would be note the limited capacity available within the existing build-up area boundaries, etc., and the potential need to find substantial land outside of these areas when available land and other opportunities have been exhausted.
Thanks very much. So that's an amendment to the proposal made by Councillor Rylance. Councillor Rylance, are you happy to accept that amendment?
Sorry, Councillor Blakey, could you repeat that?
Okay. I should try to remember what I said now. We're saying that the existing built-up area boundaries of the main towns and the potential need to find substantial land outside these areas to meet the future developments of the district when the identified areas within the towns have been exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of struggle with the concept of, it seems a little bit easy just to reach straight for substantial land outside built up areas rather than fully exploring all the options available within the current built up area. So yes, I see where you're going with that. I quite like to remove the word substantial from the recommendation, if I'm honest, but I don't know what other people feel about that. The potential need to find land outside of these areas. So if we took away substantial, I mean, I just feel like we're saying, oh, look, there's loads of land over there. Let's just go and do that instead of trying to get developers to produce 3 or 4 story blocks. I mean, it just seems like the part 2 is a little bit of a cop out, if I'm honest, because of the word substantial, essentially. So if you could remove the word substantial, I'd be very happy with Councillor Blakey's amendment. What do you think, Ed?
Are you happy with that?
Yeah, I'm not going to be too precious about it. I think that for the looking further into the future, the land required, we continue to see population growth in the area. The land required will be substantial, but one man's substantial is another man's trivial. So if we want to remove that word on the basis of Councillor Rylance's recommendation, I'm happy to go with it.
I think we're getting into semantics, aren't we? So
We are.
Councillor Davey, are you happy with the amendment as you're the seconder?
Yes, I am, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think that we need to remember that this is 766 potential sites in total. It's not 766 per year. If it was, we wouldn't have a problem. And I think Councillor Moulding sort of implied that, but I think that was just a slip of the tongue. But it is in total, and given all the other constraints, those sites may simply not happen. But I'm quite happy with the amendments, and I think we're making it clear what we're after. And I think Ed's already implied that there was great support in the first indications we've seen from the consultation that people obviously want to see towns developed before open countryside is. But we also need to recognise that that may not satisfy all our future housing needs.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Howe, is it really burning that you need to?
It's again a subtle touch. I'm not arguing about the proposal or anything else. I'm quite comfy with that now as it stands. It was Ed's comments and his recommendation that we don't assist on these brownfield inner urban sites, and I think we need to give Ed a guidance that we do want some support. We don't want officers just to let the developers do what they want whenever they want. We do need to actively encourage development in these towns and work with the towns and the other built up area boundaries, the villages, etc., to bring forward good quality, and density schemes. So I'm not saying we need to throw the whole planning team under the bus trying to do it at the same time, but I do think we need to dedicate a little bit of officer time trying to work on the bigger schemes, to bring them forward and get them going if we can. Otherwise, we are at the hands of the developer again, and we can't do that.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Just before we go to a vote, Ed, I just want to come to you. And I know there are a lot of issues with officer resource in the planning department at the moment. Are we going to make you absolutely drown with this proposal coming through?
I don't think the proposal as drafted would cause any issues, but I'm not sure that it's clear about the resources you want to put into pursuing the sites that have been identified through the urban capacity study. So I suppose some clarity on that, because my fear is that we could put an awful lot of resource into it but yield very little in terms of housing numbers that actually come out of that process if we do, and that could delay our ability to keep to the local plan timetable and produce the reports that we envisaged in the previous report on the agenda, and get to a draft plan by the end of this year. So I think there is a question that I could perhaps do with some further guidance on, in terms of how much resource you want us to put into trying to pursue the sites that the urban capacity studies identified. and how much of a priority you give to that in terms of are you willing to delay production of the local plan for potentially a couple of months while we do that, for example, because I think, you know, if we were to go into that wholeheartedly to try and pursue those sites and understand exactly what their potential are, that's sort of the level of consequence it could potentially have.
Councillor Howe, you want to come back straight away?
Yeah, I think I might just be able to clear this up quite easily. I don't see it as fundamental to the local plan, because this is further development after the local plan. We set our numbers in the local plan, and Ed, respectfully, sir, I really do. But this is to make sure these numbers we're putting in our local plan at present, we're agreeing with you on the, whatever it was, 766. But to bring them forward is, provided we endorse the local plan, then we've got to make sure 766 minimum homes are developed, if you get my meaning. So I don't think it affects the local plan development. It just means next year, year after, we need to start working with these landowners to make sure this land is brought forward and used in the future. Does that help at all?
I suppose from my point of view, the question is whether or not members would want to be allocating any or all of these sites through the local plan process, because I think one thing that government guidance has certainly evolved since we did the last local plan, and certainly we're encouraged to allocate more smaller sites through a local plan than we perhaps previously would. We probably previously wouldn't have entertained allocating sites of only 5 or 10 dwellings through a local plan, but we're now encouraged to do that. And so there would be a lot of work involved if we were looking to allocate any of these sites through the local plan. If you're happy to just accept that they may come forward as windfall sites post the local plan, and we perhaps then look at measures to encourage that to happen post production of the local plan, then that's fine. But if you want to actually look at allocating some of these sites through the local plan, then there would be quite a lot of work involved in doing that, because we don't necessarily have landowners that have put them forward or put their own proposals forward in the way we do have through the HELAR for many of the larger sites. We would have to be doing a lot of legwork to enable them to get to the point in terms of evidence to be able to allocate them and put them forward in that way.
Thanks very much, Ed. Councillor Rylance, and then we'll go to Shirley Shaw to sum up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to essentially say what Councillor Howe just said, but we don't need a granular level of detail on exactly which sites we're going to put forward in the local plan. We just need to agree on principle that as and when sites come forward, we will make best possible use of them. To produce. I'm just making it up on the hoof here, but to produce an optimal number of dwellings plus an optimal amount of employment space. I mean, we don't need to have every single site that you've identified at this stage in the local plan. And in fact, there might be more that come forward to a later date. So, we wouldn't want to script that too much, to my mind, for the next 10 years. But we have to bear in mind that if all these sites came forward, that would be nearly an entire year's worth of housing delivered over the 10 years. So the chances are that more would appear over the 10 years as well. And I just think we need an agreement in principle that as and when urban sites come forwards in these areas, we will work hard to make the best possible use of that land.
Thank you very much, Councillor Rylance. Mike, I think we've done this to death now, so we're going to just go to sum up. That's okay.
Well, I was just going to, it's a sideway move for Ed. Because obviously what we can do is revisit this when we discuss our town centres and built up area boundaries, because we can put a policy in to encourage the development of higher density. Surely that would be when we need to bring it back, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that get over the hurdle, Ed?
Yeah, we can certainly do things through policy to encourage the reuse of vacant land within towns and to promote higher densities. That's fine. And obviously it may be that through the plan process we gather sufficient evidence through sites being put forward to allocate some of these sites. So comfortable with that, and then to my mind the remainder then go into our supporting evidence for a windfall figure to be factored into our housing numbers. the point I was making, that if members wanted us to pursue these to the point of allocating potentially all of them, then there's an awful lot of work to do. But if that's not members' will, and that's how I read what's been said, then I'm comfortable to work on the basis of we encourage through policy and we factor in a windfall, but not necessarily allocate them all.
Thanks very
Sounds
much,
good.
Ed. Mrs. Shaw, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, there's two limbs to this motion. That's the committee note the work in relation to the urban capacity study summary of findings report and related appendices, and endorse its use as evidence in support production of the new local plan, with the caveat that we explore higher densities in towns. And secondly, that members note the limited capacity available within the existing built-up area boundaries of the main towns, and the potential need to find land outside of these areas to meet the future development needs of the district when the identified areas within the towns are exhausted. Members, please press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is underway. Okay, Chair, so the vote is carried by 9 votes in support, none against, and no abstentions.
Very much, Wendy. So we'll move on to agenda item number 9, which is the future of new homes bonus consultation. And again, it's over to you, Ed Freeman.
Thank you, Chairman. So hopefully members will be aware of the new homes bonus, which the government uses as an incentive to local authorities to increase housing delivery within their areas, and has been an important funding stream for the council in recent years. As you can see from the financial implications section in the report, we reached a peak of £4.5 million of funding through the new homes bonus in the 2017-18 financial year. And we'll be receiving about 2.5 million in the 2021-22 financial year. So still an important part of the funding of the council. So important that we felt as officers it was important that we responded to this consultation that the government have put out that looks at options for reforming the new homes bonus and how that's calculated, which could potentially have significant consequences for funding coming into the council. So what we've done in the report is summarise the proposals that are being put forward by the government and the options, and provided within the shaded boxes draft responses to the consultation questions. So the main options that come forward, I think, start from sort of question 4, where it talks about the split between district councils and the county councils. Currently 80% of new homes bonus comes to the district councils, 20 to the county. I think it talks about potentially increasing the county share. Their response is that the existing split seems fair given the limited role of the county council in housing supply and allocation. Then there's a section that talks about the affordable housing premiums. There's a premium of £350 per additional affordable home that's currently applied. The responses talk about how that perhaps needs to take into account tenure split and perhaps do more to incentivise the delivery of social housing, particularly where that's obviously going to do more to meet the needs of the community in the district than the sort of discounted market housing type of products that are more widely available. And obviously the greater cost of delivering social housing often means that you get a smaller number of affordable units from a site as a result from pursuing that tenure, which can then hit us in terms of the new homes bonus that we receive as a result. So there's an issue there that we've sought to provide some details to government to help inform their views on the new homes bonus. There's then options looking at the role of rewarding local authorities for long-term empty homes brought back into use, which has been another component of that for the council, and I think important in terms of ensuring that we maximise the potential for the existing housing stock to meet our needs rather than forever building more and more new homes whilst leaving a trail of vacant homes behind us, as it were. It then talks about time periods for that, and also this baseline that's applied, percentage baseline, and there's various options pursued there, which I won't go into detail on, but we've sought to respond to that on the basis of trying to maintain the existing arrangements in terms of that. And then it talks about the formula about over past performance and averaging that out over a period of time, which seems a sensible approach given what we've already said earlier in the meeting about how housing supply can ebb and flow over time, which can make financial planning quite difficult to predict what the new homes bonus might be. So there's some benefit in that, I feel, in terms of looking over a longer period. It then talks about potentially repurposing the bonus to support infrastructure investments, which to my mind is confusing two different things. The new homes bonus being there to incentivise housing delivery, whereas the infrastructure levy proposed in the planning white paper would clearly be to deliver infrastructure. So they're two different things to my mind, and I think it somewhat confuses the picture if we try and merge them in any way. It then talks about modern methods of construction and introducing a premium for encouraging modern methods of construction, which personally I find rather odd because we have relatively little say over the means of construction through the planning process. So to incentivise us to deliver something that we have relatively little sway over seems a rather strange way of pursuing this. And then it also looks at the impact of having an up-to-date local plan on how new homes bonus should be distributed, and the approach we tried to take in terms of those responses, that obviously there are other incentives to encourage local authorities to have an up-to-date local plan. I don't think the new homes bonus needs to be brought into that equation. It's quite a simple tool at the moment in terms of encouraging housing growth and delivery. Not having an up-to-date local plan is in itself going to inhibit the ability of a local authority to deliver housing, and so to make it a sort of double whammy doesn't seem to make sense. So that's a broad overview of the options being pursued through the consultation and the responses that we've looked to draft. Obviously there's lots of detail in that wording, but hopefully that's a useful overview. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed, and thank you for the report and all the detailed answers. To my mind, I agree with pretty much all of them. Does anyone outside of committee wish to speak on this? No. So, Councillor Rylance, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Chair. So, Ed, it was a very interesting, actually. I know I don't always agree with you, but as I was reading through this report and formulating an answer in my own head, and then I'd get to your answer and find it pretty much was identical to what I was thinking of. What I was slightly concerned about in the level of questioning is either these questions are very, very cunningly phrased so that they get the most possible information out of us, or they were written by somebody who doesn't really have any real idea about how planning policy works. And I found that super alarming, really, that our framework is governed by people who don't really understand how local authorities deliver houses. Well done, because I feel like you were schooling them as you went along. I mean, I don't know whether there are some local authorities that are so underperforming that they would actually need this level of support from government. But I feel like we could be running this part of government, to be honest. There was one question where I did disagree with you slightly, and then I thought about it some more and thought maybe actually he's got a point, and that was about the split, the 80-20 split, because I was thinking that actually when we as a planning authority deliver new houses, we're also delivering potentially new people to Devon County Council to make provision for, and they seem to get all the expensive services on the whole. And I did question whether maybe we should consider maybe giving them a little bit more of the windfall. But actually, we do tend to end up investing in joint projects. And so bit by bit, the money does find its way back into joint infrastructure projects. So actually, I changed my mind slightly on that one. I really massively agree with you on the thing about social housing. I do think we should be incentivized more to deliver social housing because the need for the infrastructure around them is somewhat higher. And so I do think that would be the right way to go. And I really hope that we get some form of governmental support on this, because affordable means anything from, shared ownership, so that you end up with paying the same amount, down to really not affordable at all, when ideally we need to be delivering stuff that people can afford on local wages. And affordable doesn't necessarily mean that at all. So I'd like to see us delivering houses that people could actually afford to live in on local wages down in East Devon, because at the moment affordable seems to mean delivering houses that people still have to end up claiming wraparound benefits to live in. And so I'd like, my personal view is I'd like to see the focus on very much delivering more social housing that's actually truly affordable. I mean, I bet dare not even use that word anymore, because it doesn't actually mean affordable anymore. So yes, so I agree with you on that. I think we should up definitely agree we should up they should up the extra bonus for social housing. But that is a very, very political consideration, I guess, based on whether our government actually supports the delivery of social housing. So I would like to see that go ahead. So any opportunity you get to push that bit, definitely. Well, thank you for all these answers, actually. And I just feel like whoever wrote this questionnaire has been schooled, really. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Rylance. Councillor Thomas, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think they're a good set of answers to a predictable set of questions. To move things forward, can I just propose that the recommendation is taken as read and all the answers are supported? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Rylance, that's fantastic. Councillor Thomas, do you want to come back in?
I think I'll let you off this time, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Shaw, can you sum up, please? And we'll take it to a vote.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, the motion is that members consider the government consultation on the future of new homes bonus and recommend on to Cabinet that the proposed responses to the consultation questions form the Council's formal response to be submitted to the government. Please, when press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, and raise your electronic hand if you're abstaining from the vote.
For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is underway. Okay, Chair, so I have 8 votes in support of the motion, none against and no abstentions.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and thank you very much, Mrs. Shaw. Could we possibly take a 5-minute comfort break now and then take the last 2 items quickly? I know it's probably to the disgust of Councillor Thomas right now, but we're an hour and a half in, and we can quickly cover off the last 2 items. So if we take 5 minutes now.
Okay, Chair.
Thank you.
Wendy, can you hear me?
I can, yes.
That's all right. I'm now doing this remotely by car, so I can only speak. I've got no ability to vote or anything else. So, or put my hand up if I want to speak. All right.
Okay, so on the next one, I'll verbally ask you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is it only you that can put hands down, Wendy? I can't see where I could do it. I would do it if I could.
Oh, I thought you were doing it, Ollie. I haven't.
Oh no, sorry. I'm putting hands down. It's the green ticks.
Oh yes, I can do that one.
That's fine. Yeah. I'm happy to do it if I can, but I can't see where to do it.
think we're ready to start, Wendy. Thanks very much. So we'll move on to agenda item number 10, which is the Mppf and National Model Design Code consultation. And it's over to Ed Freeman for a report.
Thank you, Chairman. So another consultation from government that's open at the moment is on some proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, and they've also published new guidance on a National Model Design Code as well. So the changes to the National Planning Policy Framework pick up on a number of detailed issues about amendments to guidance on flood risk and climate change, and a number of changes in relation to some legal cases to clarify policy, and a few minor factual changes with regard to some out-of-date text, and some other recent changes in regard to Article 4 directions, for example. So those are very detailed issues, so I won't go into detail on those. We've prepared draft responses to those. For the most part, I think they're useful additions. I think we've provided some detailed comments on some of the detailed wording in places where it doesn't seem to quite make sense, but on the whole, I think we're generally supportive there. The main area of focus is around the outcomes of the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission that members may be aware of, and was set up to champion beauty in the built environment, with a number of clear primary aims around promoting better design and style of homes, villages, towns and high streets, exploring how new settlements can be developed with greater community consent, and to make the planning system work in support of better design and style, not against it. And the Commission's report, which came out, I think, end of 2019, had three overall aims, which were about ask for beauty, refuse ugliness, and promote stewardship. And they made 45 detailed policy propositions, and the government's tried to incorporate a number of those into the guidance, which I think, again, for the most part, is helpful additions to the National Planning Policy Framework, certainly very supportive of improving design standards and better guidance, more detailed guidance within the National Planning Policy Framework to help us to do that, I think is welcomed, and will hopefully help us in terms of framing local level policies through the new local plan that can further encourage better design. There's then the consultation on the National Model Design Code. I think the name's slightly deceptive because it makes it sound like it is a national design code, which it's not. It's guidance on how to produce design codes, which I think on the whole, again, is helpful. There's some comments, some more detailed comments on that towards the end of the paper, which we've worked up with our urban designer. I think the general gist of our comments really is that I think the design code is useful in terms of considering aspects of design beauty and very much the aesthetics of design, but we shouldn't lose sight that a key component of good design is also that designs are good, accessible, user-friendly spaces, that's a clear important component, as well as the impact of value and cost on design, and how things are delivered often has a big impact on the design outcomes that then come out at the other end of it, not just and so there's a bigger picture here, I think, than just the design aspects looked at in isolation, which concerns us a little bit in terms of that guidance, as well as the way it looks at very much engaging with communities more through the design process, which I think is welcomed. But there's a fair amount of interpretation needed, and I'm not sure how accessible the document actually is in terms of Joe Public being able to pick it up and understand the process, where they fit in and how they can engage in this work. So I think there's some ways in which that guidance could be improved, and hopefully our comments will help the government to do that, along with no doubt other comments along similar lines that I think they'll get from what I'm hearing through the profession and through the urban design profession. So hopefully the draft responses are helpful, and asking members if they are happy to endorse those as the council's formal response to the consultation. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ed. Does anyone from outside of committee wish to speak? No, so we'll move into committee. Councillor Arnold, it's over to you.
I'm so sorry. I seem to be so quick off the mark. So yes, so thank you for your responses, Ed. I mean, like you, I read all the way through your report thinking, where's climate change in this? Why are we talking about what a house looks like and not how warm or dry it is? I mean, for my money, if a house is warm, dry, cozy, and easy to run, that's got a lot more value than being pretty on the outside. I think, you know, it's 2021. We shouldn't be aiming to produce houses that are not designed with climate change in mind. And I was a little perturbed, well, slightly more than perturbed actually, to see that almost the entire focus of this was about how houses looked and not how they performed for their owners and their residents. So thank you very much for mentioning the right towards the end with the National Model Design Code question, the fact that climate change barely figures, because I think it's beyond crucial that we'd start addressing climate change through the planning process. And as for the bizarre question about statues, well, redesigning the tickets on statues, yes. Well, I would say Bristol City Council tried for decades to redesign the ticket on the Edward Colston statue, and every single time they were blocked by a particular group of councillors with the backing of the Merchant Venturers Society. When Edward Colston was a member of the Merchant Venturers Society, he was around 400 years ago. So essentially, for whoever it is who's put this plan forwards to redesign the ticketing on statues so that they cause less annoyance, you're like 40 years behind, because Bristol City Council tried to do this for 40 years with the Colston statue, and every single time they were blocked by their Conservative councillors backed by the Society of Merchant Venturers. So thank you very much for finally considering that actually, you know, we need to put some of these figures into perspective before they all get torn down and thrown in harbours. But please, can we consider the needs of people who are currently living above the veneer put on historical figures? Yes, let's redesign every single sign on every single statue in the country in order to put them into some kind of nuanced context, rather than using them as ways to lionize people who didn't necessarily have a particularly 100% glorious way of making their living. So I'm glad they finally decided as a government that offering a little more historical nuance is a good idea, because I fully support that as well, but we should have been doing it for decades. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Rylance. Councillor Blakey, try and follow that up.
Well, I'm not going to go and try and rewrite history. I don't think we've quite got time for that. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, they say. So what's beautiful and what's ugly? If we were sat here in 1971 rather than 2021, we'd be thinking single pitched roofs, and we'd be thinking multi-story high-rise flats would be beautiful with all the green space around them. Tastes change over time. So I've got a horrible feeling that despite the lofty ideals of this, that actually we're going to end up with something which is not going to be a great deal of use. What's beautiful to us now and what might be considered ugly by us now may be considered absolutely hideous in a few decades time from now, and we could all be castigated in history, as seems to be the way we do things these days. The only pertinent question, I think, from the East Devon perspective is, who decides what is beauty and what is ugly? Because if, as a result of this consultation, a building that is considered not beautiful becomes a valid reason for objecting to a planning application, is that going to be the case? And if so, is the planning department going to be swamped forevermore by endless objections over every building that's put up because it hasn't got Doric columns or the right kind of lighting hanging off outside it. I think it is potentially a recipe for great difficulty, and I don't know whether through you, Chair, Ed might think the same.
Thank you very much, Councillor Blakey. Ed Freeman, over to you if you can. If you want to, sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I have some sympathy for what Councillor Blakey is saying, in that design is obviously very subjective. And I'd like to think, I mean, design is obviously already a key consideration of any planning application. I should say, obviously, we do get a lot of comments on design issues already. But there's two aspects to that, though. There's the functionality of spaces, and in terms of design and how a space works, which is perhaps much more objective, I suppose. And then there's the design of buildings themselves, which I kind of think of as slightly separately, which is very much the sort of cosmetics of materials. Do you like pitched roofs, flat roofs, mono pitches, and all of these things, which is very subjective. And I think, but what I would say is I think good design tends to shine through, and whatever your particular tastes and whatever particular periods of architecture you might like, I think generally most people can appreciate something that's well designed, even if it's not in a style that they particularly like, and can distinguish between something that's well designed within a style they don't like and not well designed within a style that they don't like. So for example, I mean, I think Councillor Blakey was talking about sort of the post-war period of architecture and all the concrete and high-rise and things, but there are still good examples even from that period that are now listed or are held in high regard, because they were well designed at that time. And I think that's the key here, is trying to set aside subjectivity and particular styles and features that we might not like, and just look at what's the most appropriate solution for a particular site. What's well designed within the style and that's been chosen, and the constraints of that particular site. And I think what the government guidance looks to do is talk people through a process that helps them to do that. It doesn't look to be overly prescriptive about particular styles and features to lead people down a particular route. So I think it does leave potential scope, or plenty of scope, for innovation. So I don't think it's an overly large problem moving forward, but I think it's important that we all, whether officers or members as potential decision makers in the planning process, set aside our own particular likes and dislikes, and try and be as objective as possible. But it is always a challenge. Hopefully that helps.
Thank you very much, Ed. Councillor Arnold, we'll go to you next, and then we'll hopefully take things to a recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. What I liked about this report was actually, I was looking at the conclusion at the end, that the idea being that, in essence, we'll be looking at the design codes according to the individual big allocations. And that seems a really sensible way to do this. So what's the sentence? Overall, it is considered that the best way to deliver appropriate design coding in the district is to undertake design code exercises for each of the major site allocations coming through the local plan, and for the council to lead on this work and engage with the community on the codes. And I think that's really sensible. I completely take Councillor Blakey's point, one man's fish is another man's poison. I'm sure that's not actually the right thing, is it? It's one man's something. Meat is another man's poison. One man's fish is another man's fowl. I don't know. But, look at Poundbury that we all drive past so often. What is it? Is it an absolute atrocity, or is it a gift to the nation from an enlightened future monarch? Who knows? So to me, this is what we're being asked to do in the recommendations here is to look at this moving forward, but not try and decide for East Devon that we're all no longer going to have red roof tiles or, kind of UPVC windows or anything. It's not that prescriptive. It's based according to upcoming major developments, I think. So unless anybody else wants to, Chair, I'm happy to propose those recommendations, 1, 2 and 3. Thank you.
Councillor, I think you're on item 11. We're currently on item 10.
And explain a measure of confusion. I withdraw that that recommendation proposal, then, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davey, go to you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, in the Chair's briefing, we had a bit of a discussion about how design impacts on functionality as well. And having been involved in the arts, I know that sometimes design and functionality go hand in hand. And I don't know where this could go, Ed, possibly just in the last section, to point out that good design can also mean good insulation, and I would like to see design that takes into account climate change and the need to save energy. Because if you design a house with little bits all over it that are just leaking energy, then it's not efficient. So I think energy efficiency and good design can go hand in hand. I'd just like to wonder if we can add anything to that effect.
Thanks, Councillor David. Councillor Blakey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Let's not confuse building regs with design. I think that this item and actually the previous item it really are where things like the performance of a building, insulation and so on, really should be a matter for building regulations to be determined by government. It almost looks like some of those items are being passed out to local authorities. I don't think that should be done that way. I think that there should be national building regs that take account of improving standards of construction, including insulation and so on and so forth, all the environmental issues that we know about. Let's not confuse them. This is purely about what do the buildings look like, what is going to create an attractive environment on the outside, and to an extent on the inside, but it is not about how these things are built.
Chair?
Councillor Blakey. Councillor Howe, I was just about to ask if you wanted to speak.
Thank you so much. And aptly timed to follow in Councillor Blakey's words. It is exactly that. It is not about building control remit, which we have no touch over. So energy efficiency is not part of this. But we do need to look at good design as inspiring. You know, a well-designed school, a fantastically designed school will inspire the kids inside it. And that is a well-known fact. And it goes on throughout the environment you live in and everything else. So we need good design. And I enthusiastically support this. So as such, I'm happy to move it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howe. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Davey. Councillor Arnold, can we just take this to a vote? Do we? Thank you very much. Mrs. Shaw, can you sum up, please, and we'll go to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, members, there's only one motion here, that members consider the proposed changes to the National Planning Policy Framework and the proposed National Model Design Code and agree the proposed responses to the consultation for submission on behalf of the Council. Members, please raise your press your green tick if you're in support of the motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, and raise your electronic hand if you're indicating you're abstaining from the vote.
Thank you. For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is underway. Bear with me. I can confirm the vote is carried. Oh, before I confirm, Councillor Howe, would you like to verbally confirm what you would like to do?
I'm quite happy to support the motion.
Lovely, thank you. So including Councillors Howe, that is 9 votes in support, no votes against and no abstentions. That is carried.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and thank you very much, Mrs. Shaw. So we'll move to the last agenda item of the day, and that is agenda item 11, East Devon, Devon District Design Guide. That is a mouthful to say, apologies. Ed Freeman to present his report.
Thank you, Chairman. So, yes, avid readers of our local development scheme will be aware that since the middle of 2018, actually, we've been proposing the production of an East Devon District Design Guide. And we have made some significant progress in terms of developing that, but it's been difficult marrying that up with what the government agenda has been during this period. As you've heard in the previous report, they've had the Building Better, Building Beautiful Commission working. They've also published a national design guide of their own, which talks designers through a similar sort of process that we were at the time considering incorporating into the East Devon District Design Guide, acknowledging from the discussion we've previously had that it's not necessarily our role to be overly prescriptive about design and specific design features and materials, more that we guide developers and designers through a process that then leads them hopefully to good design outcomes by ensuring that they've considered all of the relevant issues, the surrounding area, the functionality of the space that they're creating, and all of these inputs are then input into the design and form of the development that they are then bringing forward. So it's been a bit stop and start with this alongside that work, and we've obviously subsequently had the planning white paper that then talks about design coding of development as a key component of a more design-led planning system in the future. And now the consultation we've just been talking about on the actual guidance itself for design coding, which seems to put more emphasis on design coding for specific sites and areas rather than district level design coding. So in light of all of this, the work that we paused sort of, I think sort of end of 2019 to see what was happening in terms of the government direction of travel, we're now being sort of reviewing how we then take that work forward, or indeed whether or not we should take that work forward. And really there's a number of options that start on the bottom of page 59 in the report around where we still pursue the original proposed design guide and checklist approach. We did reach the point of a first draft of that, but it seems to have been largely superseded by the national design guide that's been produced, which talks people through a similar process. And also they've recently revised Buildings for Life, which is another good document in terms of taking people through a process towards a good design outcomes. So I'm not sure that really resurrecting that work and finishing that is necessarily a good use of officer time at the moment. There's an option of obviously then resurrecting the option of a district design code, which would be very much more prescriptive and looking at design in detail across the district. But I think that would be a massive piece of work, would be quite prescriptive, and would be likely to reinforce traditional design principles and in danger of stifling innovation, which is what a lot of these documents have tended to do in other areas. It also comes with a hefty price tag of potentially a six-figure sum to commission external consultants to do that work, because aside from resources, I'm not convinced we've got the expertise in-house with our single urban designer to do that work ourselves. Site-specific design codes seems to be very much the favoured approach in terms of government guidance and the white paper coming forwards. And I think this would similarly be our favoured approach, would be to, as we progress the local plan, to bring forward site-specific design codes for the large-scale development sites allocated within the plan. And so we make sure that those are in place as early in the plan's time, lifespan, as it were, to influence those developments and help to remove uncertainty to the development industry, be clear about what we're expecting and what we want to see happen. And engage our communities in that work as well, to ensure that there's hopefully buy-in to those developments and people can genuinely have a say about what form those take. The other option explored is having no design codes at all. I'll brush over that one because I think the conversation we've had so far already shows genuine support to enhancing design standards in the district, and I think having no design codes at all would not achieve that outcome. So I think our favoured approach as officers is very much focusing on site-specific design codes. I think the planning white paper talks very much about trying to develop these alongside the local plan, and part of our comments, members may recall back to the consultation on the white paper, we raised concerns about how time-consuming that could be and the delays that's likely to generate in terms of plan production, as well as the resources that are needed. Clearly, we're currently preparing a local plan under the current system with just one eye on the white paper. So I think our approach needs to be very much more on the basis of trying to progress with the local plan production on the timescales we've already discussed, but following on shortly after plan adoption with site-specific design codes. But that will need potential additional resources to enable that to happen in good time, depending on the scale and number of significant sites that we want to design code when the time comes. So the recommendations sort of pick up on that, asking members to note the current position with the East Devon Design Guide, agree a focus on undertaking design coding for the main site allocations through the local plan, and that this be done as supplementary planning documents post-adoption of the local plan, and that we bring a further report to members in early 2022 to consider the need for and scope of that work, and also the resource implications. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Moulding, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be a little bit parochial because back in between 2015 and 2018, I was very much involved in trying to create a neighbourhood plan for Axminster. And one of the main part of that neighbourhood plan that I couldn't complete at the time was the production of a design guide for Axminster. And nobody could really tell me what I needed to do to write a design guide for Axminster. All I was told was, well, if you hang on, there's going to be an East Devon design guide, and you can take that as a template for your design guide. But Axminster wouldn't have been easy because it's an old Saxon settlement. It has Roman influences. It has a 13th century church, which has been rebuilt in several areas. There are a lot of very old buildings in parts of the town. In other parts of the town, they were rebuilt after the Great Fire of Axminster in the 19th century. And so the central core of Axminster was rebuilt. And after the Second World War, we're going up a bit now, a number of local authority developments took place in Axminster, Fox Hill, North Street, Millway Rise. Some of you will know them. And of course, so there was an influence of stuff that was built in the 1950s, 1960s. But because of all the variety of buildings in Axminster, I just really didn't have a clue on how to write a design guide for Axminster, and I still don't. There is a new group who have been formed to write a neighbourhood plan, and they're still being involved by they're consulting with the neighbourhood plan officer at East Devon District Council, who's saying, well, you must write a design guide for Axminster. But I think now what we're being told by Ed is that any design guide should be site-specific rather than town-specific. So could Ed tell me whether the neighbourhood plan group that are now writing that plan should be required to write a design guide for Axminster?
Thank you very much, Andrew. I'll take Councillor Blakey next and give Ed a bit more time to write his thoughts down. Councillor Blakey.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And actually, I'm just going to extrapolate on what Councillor Moulding has just said, because within East Devon, we have in each of our towns and villages an enormous variety of existing buildings that are made of all sorts of materials, some of them new, many of them very old, and each has its own individual character and flavour. And I hope you sat down for this, Ed. I'm going to agree entirely with what Ed Freeman has said, and for me, that a site-specific design code is the way to go ahead. All right, Ed, you can stop laughing now. I don't think there can realistically be any other way that sites can be designed that will otherwise fit in with their immediate surroundings. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Blakey. I'm currently holding the Seaton Town Design Statement from 2009, and reading through it, it's not easy to follow. So I completely concur with Ed's comments. Ed, just over to you to cover off Councillor Moulding's comments, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I'm not sure what's been said in terms of Axminster Neighbourhood Plan. My view is there's certainly no requirement to have a design guide as part of the neighbourhood plan. I fully understand the desire to have something, and I think while a district design guide, as I've said, is fraught with difficulties because of the variety of different settlements and different character areas we've got across the district, it becomes a bit more manageable across a town. So I think it's doable if that's what the neighbourhood plan group wish to see in Axminster, and we can obviously try and support that work. I'm sorry if they were waiting for an East Devon design guide. I think the national design guidance is probably quite helpful if they're still looking to pursue a design guide for Axminster, as is the emerging guidance referred to in the previous report of the National Model Design Code. I think they have fulfilled the role that we saw an East Devon design guide taking. So I think that guidance is now there to support Axminster if that's what they wish to do. All I'm saying is I think from an East Devon District Council perspective, we need to focus on new allocations coming forward through the local plan in terms of design coding. It would be lovely to have the resources to go around and do design codes for each settlement. I think settlement-wide areas is doable, but there'd be a huge amount of work in doing that. So I think neighbourhood plans are a good forum in which to do that work, and we'll obviously help and support them in doing that. But it's certainly not a requirement to have a design guide, but good if you can, I think.
Thanks very much, Ed. Councillor Thomas, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think a couple of points have been picked up to some extent already, but I think one of the bits that's missing in a lot of our own work is the overt link with neighbourhood planning. That certainly is the way in the look and feel and design of villages like Uplimes come forward through the neighbourhood plan itself. And I'd hesitate to encourage anything that was fundamentally contrary to that or restricted it on the ability of local communities to actually bring forward design ideas through the neighbourhood plan. Secondly, concentrating on strategic developments as a district council, I think, is absolutely the right way to go. But even that should take some recognition that they're not sanitized, they're not repeats of the last major development somewhere else, and that we do take rather strong note of local circumstances. And also it's important, I think, to be quite clear what the scope of a design code is and guide. I mean, what does it actually include? Are we talking about development layouts, look, feel, form, function, and all the different respects of that? I mean, I think some would see it virtually as being what a building looks like, whereas others would see it rather more deep than that. Finally, a lovely one here, and I'm sure Councillor Arnold would take it in good vein, but on that he sometimes feels, I think, that he knows what I'm going to say at a council meeting. I think on this occasion, I might have a pretty good idea what he's going to say. And my only question, Chair, is on the basis it's already been proposed once, am I now seconding the proposals, or technically am I actually proposing them? Thank you.
You'd be proposing them, Ian.
Well, I look forward to jumping in front of the leader and proposing them then. Thank you.
Councillor Arnold, would you like to second your own proposal?
Well, I'm queued up with the yellow hands, Chair. So I'm, as ever, it is an honour to step back behind Councillor Thomas and to second that. And I can only apologise to him, the members and officers, that I thought with particular brilliance managed to combine items 10 and 11. I was scrolling up and I didn't see the gap between the two. So apologies for that. Thank you for Councillor Thomas for doing that. One other comment, and so yes, formally happy to second that, Chair. I think the neighbourhood plan point is really interesting that Councillor Moulding has given. I won't describe Connaughton, going back to the original Saxon church and so forth, but similar evolution has taken place. I think we've just submitted our final draft neighbourhood plan, and really within that, the function of that section, which is about design, is more about creating, exactly as Councillor Moulding's just done, the narrative of what's there, rather than necessarily then coming from that to make a decision. So therefore, we'd like everything to look a bit like a Tudor house or a Victorian house. So I think maybe the neighbourhood plan doesn't have the ability to prescribe as much, unless it's, I think Axminster, probably the main thing is to make sure the houses are finished sometimes, but that's not a design code issue. But yes, Chair, happy to second that very much. Thank you very much.
Very much, Councillor Arnold. Councillor Davey, over to you.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Just to say, this is a bit of a minefield, isn't it? And I can well understand Councillor Moulding's difficulties in attempting to characterise a town like Axminster, and we would have the same problem in Exmouth. And I would have thought all we really need is general principles, such as taking account of the local housing density, the housing materials, and sort of ensuring that harmonises with the immediate surroundings, rather than attempting to prescribe exactly what kind of thing goes where. But I think I'm fully in agreement that where large developments are proposed, that we also have a code there that takes some account of the other local housing, so that it fits in rather than sticking out like a sore thumb.
Thanks very much, Councillor Davey. Councillor Howe, over to you.
Thank you. I'm back. And I suppose my enthusiasm for the last one needs to come across to this one. And I suppose it's a cautionary warning for neighbourhood plans. Not that I'm against them, I fully support them and everything else, but if we're not careful, we won't be building buildings for today. We'll be just replicating the design codes of the past. Now, that doesn't mean in Upline, we want to come along with a concrete bunker type monstrosity stuck in the middle of it. It needs to have reflections of the character of the buildings around it, but we shouldn't at the same time be ignoring modern design in its ethos and its way of bringing forward. So I just want everyone really just to understand we can't live in the past. We've got to reflect on it, but we do at the same time need to encourage great design, when it looks a bit different, I suppose is the careful word. But as Ed has pointed out, you can tell a well-designed building, whether you like it or not, is different, but you know it when it's been well-designed and well thought out. So it's just a cautionary tale to say, we don't want to keep replicating, although there are some lovely villages that you do want to keep the same. But we do need to encourage that at the same time, more modern buildings, more modern design is the way I'm trying to put it, and just be careful about it. But I'm quite happy with this as it stands. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So, Mrs. Shaw, over to you to sum up, and we'll take it to a vote.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there's 3 limbs to this motion: that members consider the current position with the proposed East Devon Design Guide and the National Design Guidance and agree that work ceases on the Design Guide; that members agree that officers focus on undertaking design coding for the main site allocations emerging from the new local plan, noting that this would need to be done through supplementary planning documents post-adoption of the local plan; and thirdly, that a further report be brought to committee in early 2022 to consider the need for and scope of design coding needed alongside the draft local plan, options for undertaking this work, and the likely resource implications. Members, please press your green tick if you are in support of this motion, press your red cross if you're against the motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you're abstaining from the vote. Thank you.
For the purpose of those watching online, the vote is underway. Okay, Chair, I can see we have 9 votes in favour, so that motion is carried.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you very much, Mrs. Shaw. Just before we finish, I just want to thank Ed Freeman and the team for all the reports today. I know it's going to be a very hectic next 24 months really for him and the team. So I know it's universal amongst all the committee members here. Just our thanks to the team for all they're doing and what they're producing. So just with that, that brings our meeting to an end. I'd like to thank everyone, including any members of the public watching online, for taking part. Can I remind all those present that your comments will be live to the public until it's been confirmed that the meeting is no longer going live. Thank you very much.